The stagecoach lurched violently to one side, throwing Zelda Nolan against the wooden frame hard enough to bruise her shoulder. And when she finally looked out the window through the dust cloud, she saw nothing but endless wilderness, and the driver sprawled motionless on the ground below. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she gripped the edge of the window frame, trying to make sense of what had just happened. The horses had bolted, dragging the coach another 50 feet before it tipped sideways and ground to a halt in a shallow ravine. The other two passengers, an elderly couple from Philadelphia, scrambled out through the opposite door, their faces white with terror. "Are you hurt?" the old man called to her. Zelda tested her limbs, feeling only the dull ache of bruises. "I think I am fine." She climbed out carefully, her traveling dress snagging on the splintered wood. When her boots hit the rocky ground, she stumbled, catching herself against the overturned coach. The September sun beat down mercilessly on the Nevada landscape, and she shielded her eyes to look around. They were somewhere between Carson City and Mojave, still a day's journey from her destination. The driver lay unmoving near a cluster of sagebrush, and the elderly woman was already kneeling beside him, checking for signs of life. The horses had broken free and disappeared over the ridge, taking with them any hope of continuing the journey. "He is breathing," the woman announced, though her voice trembled, "but he hit his head terribly hard." Zelda hurried over, her medical training from back east kicking in despite her racing pulse. She had spent 2 years studying nursing before her father's death had forced her to seek work elsewhere. The driver had a nasty gash across his temple, blood matting his gray hair. She pressed her handkerchief against the wound, applying steady pressure. "We need help," she said, stating the obvious. "How far to the nearest town?" "Mojave is still 20 miles south," the old man said grimly. "There might be a mining camp closer, but I have no idea which direction." The afternoon stretched before them like a threat. They had water from the canteens that had survived the crash, but precious little food. The desert landscape offered no shade except for the overturned coach itself, and night would bring cold that could kill as surely as the heat. Zelda was about to suggest that one of them should start walking when she heard the sound of hoofbeats. Her first reaction was relief, but the old man's expression made her pause. He reached slowly for something in his coat. "Easy now," he murmured. "Could be anyone out here." The rider appeared over the ridge like something out of a frontier painting. He sat astride a massive roan horse, his figure silhouetted against the bright sky. As he drew closer, Zelda could make out more details. He was a large man, broad-shouldered and powerfully built, with dark hair that fell past his collar and a thick beard covering his jaw. He wore buckskin and leather, and a rifle rested across his saddle horn, though he did not point it at them. His eyes, when he finally pulled up near the wrecked coach, were a startling shade of gray-blue, and they took in the scene with a sharp intelligence that made Zelda think he missed nothing. "Folks look like you have had some trouble," he said. His voice was deep and rough, like gravel sliding down a mountainside. He swung down from his horse with the easy grace of someone who had spent more time in the saddle than on his feet. "Our driver is injured," Zelda said quickly, standing to meet him. She had to tilt her head back to look at his face. He was easily over 6 feet tall, with muscles that strained against his leather vest. "He fell when the coach tipped. The horses ran off." The stranger knelt beside the unconscious driver, checking him with gentle, competent hands that seemed too large for such careful work. "Head wound," he observed. "Could be a concussion. He needs proper doctoring." He looked up at Zelda, his gaze steady. "Nearest help is Mojave." "I can take one of you with me now, come back for the others with a wagon." "You should go, my dear," the elderly woman said to Zelda. "You are young and strong. We can wait here with my husband." Zelda hesitated, but she knew it made sense. All right. She turned to the mountain man, trying to project more confidence than she felt. I can ride with you. Something that might have been amusement flickered in his eyes. You ever been on a horse before? I have ridden in Central Park, she said, lifting her chin. How different can it be? Now he definitely was amused, though he had the grace not to smile. Pretty different, miss, but we will manage. He stood, towering over her again, and gestured to his horse. Name is Kade Shepherd. I trap up in the mountains mostly, but I come down for supplies every few weeks. Zelda Nolan, she replied. I am traveling to Mojave to take a position as a school teacher. Kade nodded, then moved to his horse and mounted in one smooth motion. He held down his hand to her. Put your foot on mine and I will pull you up. Zelda approached the huge animal with more trepidation than she wanted to admit. The horse was nothing like the docile creatures she had ridden in the park, led around by handlers on gentle paths. This beast was wild-looking and powerful, muscles rippling under its hide. She placed her small boot on Kade's much larger one and grasped his hand. His palm was calloused and warm, and when he pulled, she felt the raw strength in him as he lifted her effortlessly behind the saddle. Hold on to me, he instructed, and try to move with the horse, not against it. She wrapped her arms around his waist, feeling the solid wall of muscle beneath the leather. He smelled of pine and wood smoke and leather, and something else she could not quite identify, something masculine and outdoorsy that was entirely foreign to her city-bred experience. I will be back before sundown, Kade called to the elderly couple. Keep the driver still and in the shade. If he wakes up confused, do not let him move around. Then he nudged the horse, and they were moving. Zelda gasped and tightened her grip as the animal started forward. The gait was jarring, nothing like the smooth ride she remembered. Every step seemed designed to throw her off balance, and she found herself bouncing against Kade's broad back. Relax, he said over his shoulder. You are fighting it. Just let your body move with him. I am trying, she managed, though her teeth clicked together with each stride. After a few minutes, Kade slowed the horse to a walk. This is not going to work, he said, and she felt a flush of embarrassment. But instead of criticism, he said, I am going to teach you proper. We have got time before we need to rush, and I would rather you learn to sit right than fall off halfway there. He turned the horse toward a flat stretch of ground and dismounted, then helped her down. Her legs felt shaky when her feet hit the earth. First thing, Kade said, stroking the horse's neck, is understanding the animal. This here is Ranger. He is a good horse, steady and smart. He is not going to hurt you on purpose, but you have got to work with him, not just hang on for dear life. Zelda nodded, watching as Kade's large hands moved over the horse's coat. There was affection in the gesture, respect. She had never thought about horses as creatures with personalities before, but the way Kade spoke about Ranger made her reconsider. Come here, Kade said, gesturing her closer. Put your hand on him. Let him know you. She stepped forward cautiously and placed her palm against Ranger's warm shoulder. The horse turned his head slightly, one dark eye regarding her with what seemed like patience. He is quite large, she said softly. He has got to be to carry a man my size, Kade replied. But he is gentle too. Now when you ride, you want to sit up straight but not stiff. Think of your hips as being part of the horse's motion. When he steps forward, you move forward. When he rocks back, you rock back. It is like dancing in a way. Zelda found that comparison helpful. She had learned to dance back in Boston before everything had fallen apart. All right, she said. Show me. Kade mounted again, demonstrating the fluid way he moved with the animal even at a standstill. His body seemed attuned to every shift and breath the horse took. Then he dismounted and helped her up into the saddle. The world looked very different from up there, higher and more precarious. Now I am going to lead him, Kade said, taking the reins. Just focus on the feeling. Do not think too hard, just feel it. He led Ranger forward at a slow walk, and Zelda gripped the saddle horn with both hands. The movement was rolling, almost like being on a ship, and she tried to let her body follow it instead of resisting. Better, Kade said after a moment. You are getting it. Now try to sit a little taller. You are hunching. She straightened her spine, and immediately the ride felt smoother. They walked in a wide circle, Kade patient and steady beside the horse, occasionally offering quiet corrections. The sun beat down on her bonnet, and she could feel sweat trickling down her back beneath her layers of proper Eastern clothing, entirely unsuited to the Nevada desert. After perhaps 15 minutes, Kade stopped. You are doing fine, he said. Now we are going to try something a little different. I am going to ride with you, and we will hold the reins together. I will control Ranger, but you will feel how it works. That way you will not be just hanging on, you will be part of the riding. He swung up behind her, and suddenly Zelda was very aware of his presence. His chest was solid against her back, his arms coming around her on either side as he gathered the reins. She could feel the warmth radiating from him, the steady rhythm of his breathing. Put your hands here, he said, guiding her hands to rest over his on the reins. His hands were so much larger than hers that they nearly engulfed her small fingers. Feel that. There is always contact with the horse's mouth, but it is gentle. You guide, you do not yank. All right, she said, her voice coming out smaller than she intended. Kade made a soft clicking sound with his tongue, and Ranger started forward. This time, with Kade's body supporting her from behind and his hands over hers on the reins, Zelda could feel the whole connection. The horse responded to pressure so slight she would have missed it if she had not been paying close attention. Kade's thighs tightened against the horse's sides, and Ranger picked up speed to a trot. The new gait was bouncier, and Zelda tensed instinctively. Easy, Kade murmured near her ear. Remember, move with him. Up, down, up, down. There is a rhythm to it. She tried to find it, and after a few jarring moments, something clicked. Her body began to anticipate the movement, rising and falling in time with Ranger's steps. Kade's arms remained steady around her, holding the reins loosely, letting her feel the connection without actually controlling it herself yet. That is it, he said, and she could hear the approval in his voice. You are a natural. Pride bloomed in her chest. They rode like that for another few minutes, circling the flat ground, and Zelda found herself actually enjoying it. There was something exhilarating about the speed, the power of the animal beneath her, the vast open sky above. Finally, Kade pulled Ranger to a stop. We should get moving for real now, he said. But you have got the basics. You will be all right. They adjusted positions, with Zelda sitting behind Kade again, but this time she felt more confident. When they started toward Mojave at a steady lope, she found herself able to move with the horse instead of against it. Her arms around Kade's waist felt less like clinging in terror and more like a natural connection, part of the whole partnership of horse and riders. The landscape rolled by, sagebrush and rock and endless sky. The sun was past its zenith now, beginning its slow descent toward the western mountains. Zelda had never seen country like this. Boston had been all brick and cobblestone, pressed buildings and narrow streets. Even the train journey west had not prepared her for the sheer emptiness of the frontier, the sense that civilization was just a thin veneer over something vast and untamable. How long have you lived out here? She asked, raising her voice to be heard. Near about 8 years, Kade replied. Came west after the war, found I liked the mountains better than I liked people. Do you ever get lonely? He was quiet for a moment. Sometimes, but lonely out here is different than lonely in a crowd. I prefer it. Zelda understood that more than she might have admitted. The months after her father's death had been filled with people, sympathetic faces, and pitying words, but she had never felt more alone. "What about you?" Kade asked. "What brings a city girl all the way out to Mojave?" "I needed work," she said simply. "The school board was looking for a teacher and I was looking for a fresh start. It seemed like fate." "You got any family back east?" "Not anymore. My father died last year. My mother passed when I was young. There was an aunt, but we were not close." She paused, then added, "That is the nice thing about starting over. No one knows your history. You can be whoever you want to be." She felt Kade nod. "I reckon I understand that too." They rode in companionable silence for a while. The rhythm of the horse's gait became almost meditative, and Zelda found her mind drifting. She thought about the school waiting for her in Mojave, the children she would teach, the life she would build. It had all seemed so clear and planned when she was still back east. But now, out here in the raw wilderness with a mountain man she had just met, everything felt uncertain and strange, yet not unpleasantly so. There was something about Kade that made her feel safe, despite his rough appearance and the rifle slung across his back. Maybe it was the gentle way he had taught her to ride, the patience in his voice. Or maybe it was simply the competent way he sat the horse, the sense that he was a man who knew this land and could handle whatever it threw at him. "Tell me about Mojave," she said, wanting to break the silence that had stretched too long. "What is it like?" "It is a decent town," Kade replied. "Maybe 200 people, give or take. Got a main street with a general store, a saloon, a church, the school. Couple of ranches nearby. Mining operations in the hills, though nothing like Virginia City. Folks are mostly honest, though you get the occasional troublemaker passing through. And the school, small. You will probably have 15, 20 students, different ages. The last teacher was a man named Horace Gentry. He left because his wife back in California got sick. They were glad to find a replacement." Zelda nodded against Kade's back. 15 or 20 students was manageable. She had student taught in larger classrooms in Boston. "The town have a library?" she asked hopefully. "Not a formal one. The church has some books and the store keeps a few for sale. But if you are a reader, you might have to send away for most things." That was disappointing but not surprising. She would make do. She always had. The sun continued its descent, painting the desert in shades of gold and orange. Shadows grew long across the scrubland and the heat began to ease. Zelda had not realized how much the temperature had been affecting her until the relief of cooler air washed over her. "We will make it to Mojave before full dark," Kade said. "Then I will round up a couple of men and a wagon, head back for your friends. Should have them safe before midnight." "That is very kind of you," Zelda said. "You did not have to stop to help us." "Could not very well ride by folks in trouble," Kade replied, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. "Not how things work out here. We look after each other or we do not survive." She liked that philosophy. It was different from the city, where everyone was so focused on their own concerns that a person could disappear and hardly be missed. They crested a rise, and suddenly there were buildings in the distance. Mojave spread out in the valley below, a collection of wooden structures clustered along a dirt road, with scattered homes and corrals branching off in every direction. Smoke rose from several chimneys, and even from this distance, Zelda could hear the faint sounds of life, a dog barking, a hammer ringing against metal, voices calling to one another. "There she is," Kade said. "Your new home." Zelda felt a flutter of nervousness in her stomach. This was it. This was the place where she would build her new life, where she would prove that she could make it on her own, without her father's support or anyone's pity. They rode down the slope and into the town as the last rays of sunlight gilded the false fronts of the buildings. People turned to look as they passed a mountain man and a city woman riding double on a horse made for an unusual sight. Zelda tried to sit with dignity despite her disheveled appearance and the dust coating her traveling dress. Kade guided Ranger to a stop in front of a building with a sign that read General Store and Post Office. He dismounted and helped Zelda down, her legs wobbling slightly when they took her full weight again. "Wait here," he said. "I will find the sheriff and get that wagon organized." Before she could respond, he was striding away, his long legs covering ground quickly. Zelda stood beside Ranger, feeling suddenly out of place. A few curious onlookers lingered nearby, and she could feel their eyes on her, assessing and wondering. The door to the general store opened, and a woman emerged. She was perhaps in her mid-40s, with graying hair pulled back in a practical bun and sharp, but not unkind eyes. She wore a simple calico dress and an apron, and she looked Zelda up and down with frank curiosity. "You must be the new schoolteacher," she said. "Miss Nolan, is it?" "Yes," Zelda said, grateful for a friendly face. "Though I am afraid I am arriving under less than ideal circumstances. Our stagecoach had an accident, so I heard. Kade Shepherd is a good man. If he said he will fetch your companions, he will do it." The woman extended her hand. "I am Margaret Hayes. My husband and I run the store. We are also on the school board. We were expecting you tomorrow, but no matter. You are here now." Zelda shook her hand, feeling some of the tension leave her shoulders. "Thank you. I apologize for my appearance. It has been quite a day." "I imagine it has. Come inside. You can clean up a bit, and I will show you to your lodgings. The school has a small cottage for the teacher. It is not much, but it is clean and private." Zelda followed Margaret into the store, leaving Ranger tied outside. The interior was dim and cool, crammed with every imaginable item from bolts of cloth to bags of flour to coils of rope hanging from the ceiling. The smell was a mixture of leather and tobacco and spices, not unpleasant. Margaret led her through a back door to a washroom, where a basin and pitcher of water waited. Zelda scrubbed her face and hands, wincing at the grime that came away. Her dress was a loss, at least for today, but she could change once she reached the cottage. When she emerged, Margaret was waiting with a cup of water. "Drink this. You look parched." Zelda drained the cup gratefully. "Thank you. Now I will take you to the cottage. It is just behind the school building, which is 2 streets over. Your trunks arrived on the earlier stage, so your things should already be there." Relief washed through Zelda. At least she would have her belongings, her books and clothes and the few precious items she had brought from home. They walked through the town as dusk settled over the valley. Margaret pointed out the important buildings: the church, the saloon, the doctor's office, the boarding house. Most of the structures were simple wooden buildings, some with false fronts to make them look grander than they were. The street was hard, packed dirt, rutted from wagon wheels. The school was a modest single-room building painted white, with windows on 3 sides to let in light. Behind it sat a tiny cottage, little more than a cabin really, but it had a covered porch and shutters on the windows. And when Margaret opened the door, Zelda saw that it was indeed clean and tidy. There was a main room with a small kitchen area, a wood stove, a table and 2 chairs, and a separate bedroom barely large enough for a bed and a trunk. "The school board provides wood for the stove and staples for the kitchen," Margaret explained. "You will receive your salary quarterly, though we can arrange in advance if you need it." "No, I should be fine," Zelda said, though her savings were nearly depleted. Pride kept her from admitting how close to broke she really was. Margaret showed her how to work the stove and where the well was for water, just a short walk down the path. Then she paused at the door, her expression softening. "I know this must seem like the edge of the world to you coming from back east," she said, "but Mojave is a good town. The people here are decent, and they will look after you. And if you need anything at all, you come find me or my husband Thomas." "All right. Thank you," Zelda said, meaning it. "That means a great deal." After Margaret left, Zelda stood in the center of the small cottage and let herself feel the full weight of the day. Her shoulder ached from being thrown against the stagecoach. Her legs were sore from riding. She was exhausted and overwhelmed and far from anything familiar, but she was also here. She had made it. She had a home, a job, a purpose. And she had survived her first day in the West, which was more than she had been certain of a few hours ago. She found her trunk stacked in the bedroom and dug out a clean dress, something simpler and more practical than the traveling suit she had ruined. By the time she had changed and unpinned her hair to brush it out, full darkness had fallen outside. She lit the lamp on the table, and the warm glow pushed back the shadows. She was sitting at the table with a cup of weak tea when she heard hoofbeats outside. Rising, she went to the door and opened it to see Kade astride Ranger, with two other men on horses beside him and a wagon bringing up the rear. The elderly couple sat in the wagon bed, looking tired but unharmed, and the driver was laid out on a pile of blankets, still unconscious. Kade dismounted and walked over to her porch. In the lamplight spilling from the doorway, he looked even larger and more imposing, but his expression was gentle. "Got them safe," he reported. "The driver is in a bad way, though. Doc Henderson is meeting us at his office." "Thank you," Zelda said, "for everything. I do not know what would have happened if you had not come along." Kade shrugged, uncomfortable with the gratitude. "Just doing what needed doing. You get settled all right?" "Yes. Mrs. Hayes has been very helpful." He nodded, then stood there for a moment as if he wanted to say something else. Finally, he just touched the brim of his hat. "I will be around town for a day or two getting supplies. If you need anything, you let me know." "I will, thank you again." She watched as he swung back into the saddle and rode after the wagon, disappearing into the darkness. Only then did she realize she was sorry to see him go, which was ridiculous. She had known the man for all of a few hours. But there had been something reassuring about his presence, something solid and dependable in a world that felt uncertain. Shaking off the strange feeling, Zelda closed the door and prepared for bed. Tomorrow, she would meet her students and begin her new life in earnest. Tonight, she would rest and be grateful she had survived. She woke to sunlight streaming through the bedroom window and the sound of children's voices in the distance. For a moment, she could not remember where she was, and then it all came back: the stagecoach, Kade, Mojave. She had really done it. She was here. She dressed in her most professional outfit, a dark blue dress with a white collar, and pinned her auburn hair up in a neat bun. Her reflection in the small mirror showed a pale young woman with serious gray eyes, looking older than her 22 years. She had always looked serious, even as a child. Her father used to say she had been born worrying. The school day did not officially begin until Monday, but Margaret had suggested she come by this morning to familiarize herself with the classroom and materials. Zelda made herself a simple breakfast of bread and butter, then walked the short distance to the school building. Inside, the schoolroom smelled of chalk and wood and old books. Rows of desks and benches faced a large slate board at the front. A teacher's desk stood to one side, and shelves along the back wall held a modest collection of textbooks and slates. It was nothing like the well-equipped schools in Boston, but it would do. Zelda spent the morning going through the materials, making lists of what she would need, planning her first lessons. She was so absorbed in her work that she did not hear the door open until a voice said, "Miss Nolan." She turned to see a young woman, probably close to her own age with blonde curls and a friendly smile. She wore a pretty yellow dress that somehow managed to look fashionable even in this frontier town. "I am sorry, I did not mean to startle you," the woman said. "I am Sarah Mercer. My father owns the saloon. I heard you arrived yesterday under dramatic circumstances." Zelda smiled despite herself. News travels fast. In a town this size, you will be the talk of Mojave for at least a week. A stagecoach crash and a rescue by Kade Shepherd. That is about as exciting as things get around here. Sarah came closer, her eyes sparkling with curiosity. "What is he like?" "Who, Mr. Shepherd?" Zelda felt her cheeks warm. "He was very kind. He taught me how to ride properly so I would not fall off on the way to town." "He taught you to ride?" Sarah's eyes widened. "Kade Shepherd barely says 2 words to anyone when he comes to town. He must have taken a shine to you." "I am sure he was just being helpful," Zelda said quickly. "He seems like the sort of man who would help anyone in need." "Well, yes, that is true. But still." Sarah settled herself on the edge of a desk, clearly prepared for a long chat. "He is quite something to look at, is he not? All those muscles and that intense way he has of looking at you. Half the unmarried women in town have tried to catch his attention, but he never seems interested." Zelda busied herself with sorting books, not wanting to continue this line of conversation. She barely knew Kade, and the last thing she needed was to be the subject of gossip before she had even taught her first class. "I am more concerned about the students," she said, changing the subject. "Do you have children who will be attending?" "Oh no, I am not married yet," Sarah said cheerfully. "Though I am hoping to change that soon. There is a rancher, David Palmer, who has been calling on me, but I came by because I wanted to invite you to dinner tomorrow night. My father and I would love to have you, and it would be a good chance for you to meet some of the other people in town." "That is very kind of you," Zelda said, genuinely touched. "I would like that." They talked for a while longer, with Sarah filling her in on the various personalities and politics of Mojave. It was the kind of information that would have taken Zelda months to learn on her own, and she was grateful for it. By the time Sarah left, Zelda felt she had made her first real friend in town. The rest of the day passed in preparation. Zelda cleaned the schoolroom, arranged the desks, and wrote out her lesson plans for the first week. By the time she returned to the cottage that evening, she was tired but satisfied. She was ready to begin. Sunday brought church services, which most of the town attended. Zelda wore her best dress, dark green with black trim, and walked with Margaret and Thomas Hayes to the small white church at the edge of town. The interior was simple but well kept, with wooden pews and windows that let in the morning light. She was aware of eyes on her as she took her seat, the congregation's curiosity palpable. The minister, Reverend Peters, was a thin man with kind eyes, and his sermon was mercifully short. Afterward, she was introduced to what felt like every person in Mojave, a blur of names and faces that she tried desperately to remember. She did not see Kade, though she found herself looking for him more than once. He had said he would be in town for a day or two, but perhaps he had already returned to his mountain camp. The thought left her feeling oddly disappointed. That evening, she attended the dinner at Sarah's home, a large building that combined the saloon on the ground floor with living quarters above. Sarah's father, George Mercer, was a booming man with a ready laugh, and he welcomed Zelda warmly. The meal was simple but well cooked, and the conversation was lively. David Palmer was there. The rancher Sarah was sweet on, along with several other young people from town. Zelda found herself enjoying the company, though she was careful not to drink more than 1 glass of the wine George offered. She wanted to keep her wits about her, and maintain her reputation as the respectable schoolteacher. As the evening wore on and the party grew louder, Zelda excused herself and stepped out onto the balcony for some air. The night was cool and clear, stars blazing overhead in a way they never did in Boston. She was standing there, breathing in the desert air, when she heard footsteps behind her. She turned, expecting Sarah, but instead found herself face to face with Kade Shepherd. He looked different than he had on the trail. He had trimmed his beard and wore a clean shirt, though still in buckskin and leather. His hair was tied back, revealing the strong lines of his face. He stopped when he saw her, surprise flickering across his features. "Miss Nolan," he said. "I did not expect to see you here." "I was invited to dinner," she replied, trying to ignore the way her heart had suddenly started beating faster. "I did not realize you were in town still." "I am leaving at first light," he said. "Just stopped by for a drink before the ride back." He moved to stand beside her at the railing, looking out over the dark town. "How are you settling in?" "Well, I think everyone has been very welcoming." They stood in silence for a moment, and Zelda found herself acutely aware of his presence, the solid bulk of him, the way he seemed to radiate warmth in the cool night air. "I never properly thanked you," she said. "For rescuing us, I mean. You saved our lives." "Like I said, just doing what needed doing." He glanced at her, his gray-blue eyes unreadable in the dim light. "You did good on that horse, by the way. Most city folks would have been too scared to even try." "I had a good teacher," she said, and was rewarded with a slight smile. "You planning to learn more? Riding, I mean. It is a useful skill out here." "I would like to," Zelda admitted, "but I do not have a horse and I am not sure where I would even begin." Kade was quiet for a moment, and she could see him thinking something over. Finally, he said, "There is a mare at the livery stable. Gentle creature, good for a beginner. If you wanted, I could teach you proper before I head back to the mountains. I will be coming back to town in a few weeks anyway. Could continue the lessons then." Zelda's first instinct was to refuse. It seemed like an imposition, and she barely knew this man, but something made her hesitate. The memory of riding with Kade, his arms around her as he taught her the feel of the reins, had stayed with her. There had been something right about it, something that had felt less like learning a skill and more like discovering a part of herself she had not known existed. "I would like that very much," she said. "If you are sure you do not mind. I would not offer if I minded." He straightened from the railing. "Meet me at the stable tomorrow after school. We will start then." Before she could respond, he touched his hat in that habitual gesture and disappeared back into the building. Zelda stood alone on the balcony, feeling like something significant had just happened, though she could not quite say what. Monday morning arrived with a flutter of nerves in Zelda's stomach. She woke early, dressed carefully, and arrived at the schoolhouse before any of the students. By 8 o'clock, children began trickling in, some with parents, most on their own. They ranged in age from 6 to 15, a mixed group of curious faces and shy smiles. Zelda introduced herself and had each student do the same, learning names and ages and a bit about their families. There was Samuel Hayes, 10 years old, son of Margaret and Thomas. The Morrison twins, Emma and Ethan, both 8. Billy Crawford, 14 and already as tall as a man. Little Lucy Chen, 6 years old with long black braids and serious eyes. And more, 17 students in all, a manageable number. She started with the basics, assessing their reading and arithmetic skills, getting a sense of where each student was academically. Some were quite advanced, others barely literate. She would have to find a way to teach them all simultaneously, a challenge but not an impossible one. The morning passed in a blur of activity. By the time she dismissed them for lunch, Zelda's head was spinning, but she felt a deep satisfaction. This was why she had become a teacher. This was the work that mattered. The afternoon session was shorter, focused on history and geography. She told them stories of the Revolutionary War, of George Washington and Benjamin Franklin, and watched their faces light up with interest. When she finally rang the bell to end the day, she felt she had made a good start. After the last student left, Zelda tidied the classroom and then walked to the livery stable as Kade had instructed. She found him already there, standing beside a pretty chestnut mare with a white blaze on her forehead. The mare had gentle eyes and stood patiently as Kade checked the saddle. "This is Rosie," he said when Zelda approached. "She is the one I told you about. The stable master says you can use her for lessons, and if you want to buy her eventually, he will give you a fair price." Zelda stroked the mare's soft nose, and Rosie wafted warm breath against her palm. "She is beautiful. She is patient," Kade corrected. "Which is more important. Now let us see how much you remember from the other day." He spent the next hour teaching her the basics of saddling and bridling a horse, explaining each piece of tack and its purpose. His hands were gentle but firm as he showed her how to tighten the girth and adjust the stirrups. Then he helped her mount, and they began with simple exercises in the corral behind the stable. "Heels down, back straight," Kade called from where he stood in the center of the ring, controlling Rosie with a long lead line. "Do not grip with your knees, just let your legs hang." Zelda tried to follow his instructions, focusing on her posture. It was harder than it looked, maintaining balance while keeping her body relaxed. But slowly, as Rosie walked in circles around Kade, she began to feel the rhythm again, that sense of moving with the horse rather than against it. "Good," Kade said. "Now we are going to try a trot. Remember, up and down with the motion. Do not fight it." He clicked his tongue and Rosie moved into a bouncing trot. Zelda immediately lost the rhythm, bouncing hard against the saddle, but she gritted her teeth and tried to find it again. Up, down, up, down. After several jarring moments, something clicked, and suddenly she was posting, rising and falling in time with the mare's gait. "There you go," Kade's voice held genuine pleasure. "You have got it. Keep that rhythm." They practiced for another 20 minutes until Zelda's thighs were burning and she was breathing hard. But when Kade finally called for her to halt and dismount, she was grinning despite her exhaustion. "You are a natural," Kade said, helping her down. His hands spanned her waist easily, and he lifted her as if she weighed nothing. For a moment, after her feet touched the ground, his hands lingered, and they stood close enough that she could see the different shades of blue and gray in his eyes. Then he stepped back, and the moment passed. "Same time tomorrow?" he asked. "Yes," Zelda said, trying to ignore the way her heart was racing, telling herself it was just from the exertion of riding. "Thank you, Kade. I really appreciate this." "My pleasure, Zelda." It was the first time he had used her given name, and hearing it in his deep voice sent a shiver through her that had nothing to do with the cooling evening air. She walked back to the cottage in a daze, her mind full of the lesson, of Kade's patient instruction, of the way he had looked at her in that brief moment when his hands had held her waist. She told herself she was being foolish. He was just being kind, helping her learn a necessary skill. There was nothing more to it than that. But that night, as she lay in bed trying to sleep, she kept remembering the solid warmth of his body behind her on Ranger, the gentle way he had guided her hands on the reins, the approval in his voice when she had gotten something right. She barely knew him. He was a mountain man, rough and isolated, while she was a city-educated schoolteacher. They came from completely different worlds. There was no future in whatever these feelings were that had started to flutter in her chest. But logic did nothing to stop her from looking forward to the next lesson with an anticipation that felt dangerously like excitement. The pattern continued for the rest of the week. Zelda taught school during the day, pouring her energy into her students and her lessons. Then, every afternoon, she met Kade at the livery stable for riding instruction. Each day she grew more confident, more comfortable in the saddle. Kade taught her to guide Rosie with subtle pressure, to read the mare's body language, to anticipate her movements. But more than just riding lessons were happening. As they worked together, they talked. Kade told her about his life in the mountains, about trapping and hunting, about the wild beauty of the high country. He spoke of seeing elk herds in the dawn mist, of fishing in crystal streams, of winter nights when the cold was so intense it seemed to stop time itself. Zelda found herself sharing things she had not told anyone else in Mojave. She spoke of her father, of the quiet man who had loved books and learning, who had encouraged her own education even when it was not quite proper for a woman. She talked about the loneliness after his death, the feeling that she had lost her only anchor in the world. "I understand that," Kade said one evening as they walked Rosie to cool her down after a particularly vigorous lesson. "Losing the person who matters most. My pa died in the war. Ma followed him a year later. Just gave up, I think. After that, I did not see much point in staying in Missouri. Nothing left for me there. Is that when you came west, more or less, drifted for a while first, tried my hand at different things. But when I got to the mountains, I knew I had found where I belonged." He glanced at her. "You feel that way about teaching?" "I do," Zelda said firmly. "I feel like I am doing something that matters. These children, they need someone who cares about their education, who wants to see them succeed. I can be that person." "You are good with them," Kade observed. "I have seen you with the students around town. They already look up to you." His words warmed her. "Thank you, that means a great deal coming from you." Friday afternoon, Kade announced that she was ready to ride outside the corral. "We will take it slow," he said. "Just a short ride around the edge of town, but you have got the skills now. You just need to build confidence." He saddled Ranger while Zelda prepared Rosie, and then they mounted and rode out together. It felt different being on her own horse, not riding double with Kade, but also thrilling. She was responsible for Rosie, for guiding her and keeping her safe. The mare responded beautifully to her cues, and Zelda felt a surge of accomplishment. They rode along the outskirts of Mojave, where the buildings gave way to scrubland. The evening sun painted everything gold, and the air was cool and clear. Kade kept Ranger to a walk, staying beside her, ready to help if needed, but Zelda managed just fine on her own. "How does it feel?" he asked. "Amazing," she said honestly. "I never imagined I could do this. A week ago, I had never really ridden a horse, and now look at me." "You put in the work," Kade said. "You did not give up even when it was hard. That is what matters." They rode in comfortable silence for a while, the only sounds the steady clop of hooves and the occasional call of a bird. Zelda found herself stealing glances at Kade, admiring the easy way he sat his horse, the relaxed confidence in every movement. He caught her looking once and raised an eyebrow, and she quickly turned her attention back to Rosie, her cheeks warming. When they returned to the stable, Kade helped her untack and groom Rosie, showing her the proper way to brush the mare and check her hooves. His instructions were patient, his voice low and soothing. The stable was dim and warm, smelling of hay and horses, and there was an intimacy to the space that made Zelda hyper-aware of every time Kade's arm brushed hers or their hands touched, reaching for the same tool. "I am heading back to the mountains tomorrow," Kade said as they finished. "But I will be back in 3 weeks for more supplies. We can continue the lessons then if you want." "I do want that," Zelda said quickly. "Very much." He smiled, a real smile that transformed his usually serious face. "Good. Practice while I am gone." The stable master knows you can use Rosie anytime. Just ride around town, get comfortable, maybe venture a little further each time." "I will." She hesitated, then added, "I will miss these lessons. They have been the best part of my day." Something shifted in Kade's expression, a softening around his eyes. "Mine too," he said quietly. They stood there in the dimness of the stable, and Zelda felt the air between them charged with possibility. She thought he might kiss her. She wanted him to kiss her, she realized with a start. Wanted to know what it would feel like, his lips on hers, his strong arms pulling her close. But Kade just stepped back, breaking the moment. "I should let you get back," he said. "You have got a long day tomorrow with the students." "Yes," she managed, trying to hide her disappointment. "You are right." They walked out of the stable together, and Kade helped her up onto her feet where she had been sitting on a hay bale, his hand warm and solid in hers. Outside, the stars were beginning to emerge in the darkening sky. "Safe travels," Zelda said. "I hope the mountains treat you well." "They always do." He touched his hat. "Take care of yourself, Zelda, and keep practicing that posting trot." She watched him walk away, his tall figure eventually disappearing into the shadows. Then she made her way back to the cottage, her mind and heart in turmoil. 3 weeks seemed like an eternity, but the days passed with surprising speed. Zelda threw herself into teaching, developing lesson plans that challenged and engaged her students. She grew closer to Margaret Hayes, who became something of a mentor, and to Sarah Mercer, whose cheerful company was a welcome distraction. She rode Rosie every day after school, just as Kade had instructed. At first, she stayed close to town, nervous about venturing too far on her own. But gradually, as her confidence grew, she explored further. She rode out to visit some of the nearby ranches, meeting the families of her students. She followed trails into the foothills, marveling at the stark beauty of the landscape. The freedom of it was intoxicating. On horseback, she could go anywhere, see anything. She was not confined by the limitations of walking or the schedules of stagecoaches. She was independent in a way she had never been before, and she loved it. But even as she reveled in her new skills and her growing comfort in Mojave, she found her thoughts returning constantly to Kade. She wondered what he was doing up in the mountains, whether he thought of her at all, whether the connection she had felt between them was real or just her imagination. Sarah teased her about it one afternoon when they were having tea at the cottage. "You have got that look again," Sarah said, grinning. "The faraway one. You are thinking about him, are not you?" "I do not know what you mean," Zelda protested, but her blush gave her away. "Oh, please." "You have been mooning over Kade Shepherd ever since he left, and I do not blame you. He is quite something. But Zelda, you do realize he is a mountain man, right? He is not exactly husband material." "I am not looking for a husband," Zelda said firmly. "I came here to teach, to build a life for myself, not to get married." "But if the right man came along," Sarah pressed. Zelda thought about that. Before coming to Mojave, she had assumed she would never marry. Her father's death had left her without prospects or dowry, and she had resigned herself to a life of independence. But now, having met Kade, she found herself reconsidering. What if there was someone who could share her life without limiting it? Someone who respected her independence and her work but also offered companionship and something more. "I do not know," she admitted. "I suppose it would depend on the man." Sarah seemed to understand. "Well, for what it is worth, I think Kade likes you. The way he looks at you when he thinks no one is watching, there is something there. Just do not wait too long to figure out what you want. Men like him do not stay in one place forever." The words haunted Zelda over the following days. What did she want? And more importantly, what did Kade want? Was he simply being kind to a newcomer, or was there genuine interest there? She would find out soon enough. The 3 weeks were nearly up, and any day now, Kade would return to Mojave for supplies. The morning he finally rode into town, Zelda was in the middle of a geography lesson. She heard the buzz of excitement from the students near the window and looked up to see several of them craning their necks to see outside. "What is going on?" she asked. "It is Mr. Shepherd," Samuel Hayes reported. "He just rode past with a string of pelts." Zelda's heart leaped, but she kept her voice steady. "That is nice. Now everyone, eyes back on the map, please. We were discussing the major rivers of the United States." But her own concentration was shot. Kade was back. She would see him this afternoon at the stable. The thought made her both excited and nervous. The rest of the school day dragged interminably. When she finally dismissed the students and tidied the classroom, her hands were actually trembling slightly. She forced herself to walk calmly to the stable, not wanting to appear too eager. Kade was already there, brushing down Ranger. He looked up when she approached, and the smile that crossed his face was genuine and warm. "Zelda," he said, "it is good to see you." "It is good to see you too," she replied, and meant it with an intensity that surprised her. 3 weeks had felt like 3 months. They fell into easy conversation as he helped her saddle Rosie. He asked about her students, about life in town, and she found herself chattering more than usual, filling him in on everything that had happened. He listened with patient attention, occasionally interjecting a question or comment. Then it was time to ride. They started in the corral, with Kade assessing her progress. He had her demonstrate everything he had taught her, and she could see the approval in his eyes as she executed each skill competently. "You have been practicing," he observed. "You have improved a lot." "I rode every day," she said proudly. "I even went out to the Morrison Ranch last week." "It is about 5 miles from town." "That is good. You are building endurance, not just skill." He mounted Ranger. "Today we are going to work on some more advanced techniques, trail riding in rough terrain, dealing with obstacles, that sort of thing. There is a good spot about a mile out." "You up for it?" "Absolutely." They rode out of town together, and Zelda felt a deep contentment settle over her. This was what she had been missing these past 3 weeks, not just the riding lessons, but Kade's presence, the easy companionship, the sense of connection. He led her to a rocky area where a narrow trail wound between boulders and through scrub brush. "This is the kind of terrain you will encounter if you ever want to ride into the foothills," he explained. "You have got to trust your horse and give her her head. She can see the ground better than you can and will pick the safest path." They spent the next hour navigating the challenging trail. Kade rode ahead, demonstrating, and then waited while Zelda followed. There were moments when she tensed up, when Rosie had to pick her way carefully over rocks or around sharp turns, but each time the mare proved steady and reliable. "You are doing great," Kade called back to her. "Just remember to breathe." Eventually, they emerged onto a flat mesa with a stunning view of the valley below. Mojave was a small cluster of buildings in the distance, dwarfed by the vast expanse of desert and mountains. Kade dismounted and helped Zelda down, then led the horses to a patch of sparse grass where they could graze. "This is one of my favorite spots," he said, settling onto a flat rock. "Good place to think." Zelda sat beside him, not too close but close enough to feel the warmth radiating from his large frame. "It is beautiful," she said softly. "I have never seen anything like this, the way the land just goes on forever." "Does it make you miss the city?" "No," she said honestly. "The city feels like a different lifetime. This is my life now, and I am happy with it." They sat in companionable silence, watching the play of light and shadow across the landscape as clouds drifted overhead. Zelda felt a peace she had not known in years, a sense of being exactly where she was supposed to be. I thought about you while I was up in the mountains, Kade said suddenly, his voice quiet, Zelda's breath caught. You did? Yeah, more than I probably should have. He turned to look at her, his gray-blue eyes serious. I am not good at this, Zelda, talking about feelings and such. Spent too many years alone. But I need to know, is this just me, or do you feel it too? Her heart was pounding so hard she was sure he must hear it. Feel what? This thing between us. This connection. He reached out and gently tucked a strand of hair that had escaped her bun behind her ear, his calloused fingers soft against her cheek. I have not been able to stop thinking about you. About your smile, your laugh, the determined way you set your jaw when you are trying to master something difficult. The way you look on a horse, like you were born to ride even though 3 weeks ago you had never done it. Kade, she whispered, his name barely more than a breath. If I am wrong, tell me now, he said. Tell me to back off, and I will. We can just be friends, just keep doing the riding lessons, and I will not mention this again. But if I am right, if you feel even a fraction of what I am feeling, then I need to know that too. Zelda reached up and placed her hand over his where it still rested against her cheek. You are not wrong, she said. I feel it too. I have felt it since that first day when you taught me to ride with your arms around me, holding the reins with me. I thought I was being foolish, that it was too fast, too sudden, but I have missed you every single day you were gone. The relief that flooded his face was palpable. He moved closer, his free hand coming up to cup her other cheek, framing her face between his large, gentle hands. Can I kiss you? He asked, his voice rough with emotion. Please, she said. He leaned in slowly, giving her time to change her mind, but she did not want to. She had been waiting for this, dreaming of it. When his lips finally met hers, it was gentle at first, almost tentative. But then Zelda leaned into him, her hands coming up to rest on his broad chest, and the kiss deepened. It was nothing like the few fumbling kisses she had received from suitors back in Boston. This was different, overwhelming, and right at the same time. Kade's lips were soft despite the roughness of his beard, and he kissed her with a controlled passion that made her head spin. She could feel the strength in him, the leashed power, but also the tenderness, the care he was taking not to overwhelm her. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Kade rested his forehead against hers. I have wanted to do that for 3 weeks, he murmured. I have wanted you to, she confessed. They sat like that for a long moment, wrapped up in each other before finally pulling apart. Kade took her hand, threading his large fingers through her smaller ones, and they sat together watching the sun begin its descent toward the mountains. So what happens now? Zelda asked. I mean, you live in the mountains and I live in town. How does this work? I do not know, Kade admitted. But I want to figure it out. I do not want this to be just some brief thing that burns out. I want to see where it goes. So do I. She squeezed his hand. Maybe you could come to town more often. I know you like the solitude of the mountains, but I would come to town every week if it meant spending time with you, Kade interrupted. The mountains will still be there, but you are something special, Zelda. I knew it the moment I saw you standing by that overturned coach, all determined and brave even though you were scared. I was terrified, she admitted with a laugh, but you did not let it stop you. That is what I admire about you. He stood and pulled her to her feet. We should head back before it gets dark. But Zelda, I want you to know I am serious about this. About you. I am serious too, she said, looking up into his rugged face. I did not come west looking for love, but I am not going to turn away from it now that I have found it. The ride back to Mojave was different from the ride out. They rode side by side when the trail allowed, their horses matching pace, and Kade reached over more than once to take her hand or simply touch her arm, as if reassuring himself that this was real. When they reached the stable, he helped her unsaddle and brush down Rosie, and then walked her back toward the cottage. They moved slowly, neither wanting the evening to end. At her door, Kade pulled her into his arms for another kiss, this one more confident, more claiming. Zelda melted against him, marveling at how perfectly she seemed to fit against his large frame, how safe she felt in his embrace. "When will I see you again?" she asked when they finally separated. "Tomorrow," he said firmly. "And the day after that. I am staying in town for a while this time. Got enough money from the pelts to last me, and I would rather be here with you than up in the mountains alone." Joy bubbled up in Zelda's chest. "I would like that very much." The next few weeks passed in a haze of happiness. Kade took a room at the boarding house and settled into a routine of sorts. Every afternoon after school they spent time together. Sometimes they rode, venturing further from town, exploring the landscape. Other times they simply walked and talked, getting to know each other more deeply. Kade told her about his life before the mountains, about growing up on a farm in Missouri, about the war, and the things he had seen that still haunted him sometimes. He spoke of his parents with love and lingering grief, and Zelda understood that pain intimately. She shared her own history, the happy childhood with her father, the lonely years after her mother's death, the struggle to find her place in a world that did not quite know what to do with an educated, independent woman. She told him about her dreams for the school, about the students she hoped to inspire, about the difference she wanted to make. They discovered shared love's books, though Kade admitted he had read little in recent years. The wild beauty of nature, the satisfaction of working with their hands. But they also discovered differences. Kade was comfortable with silence, while Zelda liked conversation. He preferred solitude while she thrived in community. But somehow, the differences felt complementary rather than divisive. The town noticed, of course. Margaret Hayes gave Zelda a knowing smile and a word of caution about propriety. Sarah was thrilled and demanded all the details. Some of the older townswomen clucked disapprovingly about a schoolteacher courting a mountain man, but most people seemed happy for them. Kade was respectful of Zelda's reputation, always conscious that she had a position to maintain in the community. They were never alone together without the possibility of being observed, and he was careful to treat her with the utmost respect in public. But in private moments, a stolen kiss behind the stable, holding hands as they rode out of sight of town, the whispered conversations on her porch in the evening, their relationship deepened. Zelda found herself falling in love with this quiet, strong man who had appeared in her life so unexpectedly. One evening, about a month after their first kiss, they were sitting on her porch as the sun set, and Zelda asked the question that had been nagging at her. "Kade, what happens when winter comes? You cannot stay in town forever, and the mountains will be impassable for months." He was quiet for a long moment, his arm around her shoulders, her head resting against his chest. "I have been thinking about that," he admitted. "About a lot of things, actually." "Like what?" "Like maybe it is time I stopped running." He shifted so he could look at her face. "I went to the mountains because I needed to be alone, needed to figure out who I was after the war. But maybe I have been alone long enough. Maybe it is time to try something different." "What do you mean?" "I mean maybe I could stay in town, find work. There is always need for someone who can hunt, who knows the land. I could guide hunters, trap closer to town, maybe even work one of the ranches part-time." He cupped her face with his hand. "I do not want to lose you, Zelda. And I do not want to ask you to give up your teaching to follow me to some remote mountain camp, so maybe I change instead." Zelda felt tears prick her eyes. "You would do that? Give up the mountains?" "I would not be giving them up entirely, just changing how I live in relation to them." He smiled. "Besides, I think I have found something more important than solitude." She kissed him then, pouring all her love and gratitude into it. When they broke apart, she said, "I do not want you to give up who you are for me. But if you are serious about staying, about building a life here, then yes, I want that too." "I am serious," Kade said firmly, "more serious than I have ever been about anything." That night, after Kade had left and Zelda was alone in her cottage, she allowed herself to fully acknowledge what was happening. She was in love, deeply, completely in love with Kade Shepherd. And he loved her too. He had not said the words yet, but she could see it in his eyes, feel it in his touch, hear it in the way he talked about their future. It was terrifying and exhilarating at the same time. The following weeks confirmed Kade's commitment. He started taking work around town, using his skills to help where they were needed. He led a hunting party into the foothills, bringing back enough game to supply the town for weeks. He helped Thomas Hayes build an addition to the store. He repaired fences at the Palmer Ranch. The townspeople began to see him not as a transient mountain man, but as one of them. He still kept himself somewhat apart. His time alone had made him uncomfortable with too much socializing, but he made an effort for Zelda's sake. And Zelda bloomed under the steady warmth of his affection. Her students noticed the change in her, the lightness in her step, the quick smile. She felt more alive than she ever had, as if she had been living in shades of gray and had suddenly discovered color. In late October, Kade took her on a ride into the foothills, to a place he said she needed to see. They rode for several hours, the trail climbing steadily into country Zelda had never explored. The air grew cooler as they ascended, and the sparse desert vegetation gave way to scrub pine and juniper. Finally, they emerged into a small valley, sheltered by red rock cliffs and watered by a spring that bubbled up from the ground. It was beautiful, almost hidden, a secret place. "This is my camp," Kade said, dismounting. "Or it was. I have not been back here in weeks." Zelda looked around with interest. There was a small cabin, more of a shack really, built against the cliff face for protection. A fire ring. A corral for horses. Signs of Kade's occupancy, pelts stretched on frames, tools neatly arranged, a careful order to everything. "It is wonderful," she said honestly. "I can see why you loved it here." Kade helped her down from Rosie and led her to a flat rock overlooking the valley below. They sat, and he pulled her close against his side. "I brought you here because I wanted you to see this part of my life," he said. "To understand where I have been, even if it is not where I am going." "I am glad you showed me." She looked up at him. "But Kade, you do not have to give this up entirely. Maybe you could keep this as a summer camp, come up here sometimes when you need the solitude. I would understand." He smiled and kissed her forehead. "Maybe, but the truth is, it does not call to me the way it used to. The mountains are beautiful, but they are not home anymore." He paused, then said quietly, "You are home now, Zelda. Wherever you are, that is where I want to be." Zelda felt her throat tighten with emotion. "I love you," she whispered. "I have loved you for weeks, but I was afraid to say it." "I love you too," Kade said, his voice rough. "I think I have loved you since that first day when you were determined to ride even though you were terrified. You are the strongest, bravest woman I have ever met, and I do not want to spend another day without you knowing that." They kissed, and it felt like a promise, a commitment. When they finally drew apart, Kade reached into his pocket and pulled out a small leather pouch. "I know this is not traditional," he said, "and maybe it is too fast, but I do not see the point in waiting when I know what I want." He opened the pouch and shook out a ring. It was simple, a thin gold band with a small turquoise stone set in it. "I had this made in town. The stone is from these mountains," seemed fitting. "Zelda Nolan, will you marry me? Will you take a chance on a reformed mountain man who loves you more than he ever thought he could love anyone?" Tears streamed down Zelda's face, but she was smiling. "Yes," she said. "Yes, Kade, I will marry you." I will take that chance." He slid the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly and then pulled her into his arms, kissing her with a joy and passion that left her breathless. They stayed like that for a long time, holding each other, marveling at the turn their lives had taken. Eventually, they rode back to Mojave, arriving after dark. Kade walked Zelda to her cottage, and on the porch, he kissed her goodnight with a tenderness that made her heart ache. "Sleep well, my love," he murmured. "Tomorrow we tell everyone and we start planning our future." Zelda floated inside, the ring on her finger catching the lamplight. She had come to Mojave looking for a fresh start, for independence and purpose. She had found all that in her teaching. But she had also found something she had not been looking for, something infinitely more precious. She had found love. She had found home. She had found Kade. The engagement caused quite a stir in Mojave, but it was mostly positive. Margaret Hayes hugged Zelda tightly and said she had never seen her so happy. Sarah squealed with delight and immediately started planning the wedding. Even the more conservative townswomen seemed to approve once they saw how devoted Kade was to his fiancée. They decided to marry in December, after the fall term ended. That would give Kade time to finish building a proper house on a piece of land he had purchased just outside town. It would be close enough for Zelda to walk to school, but far enough to offer privacy and a bit of land for horses and maybe, someday, children. Kade attacked the project with characteristic determination, working from dawn to dusk to get the house ready. Other men from town helped: Thomas Hayes, David Palmer, even some of Zelda's students' fathers. It became a community effort, a barn-raising of sorts, and the house took shape quickly. It was a simple structure, 2 rooms with a loft, but it was solid and well-built, with a large fireplace and windows that let in plenty of light. Kade made much of the furniture himself, his large hands surprisingly skilled at woodworking. A table and chairs, a bed frame, shelves for Zelda's books. Zelda focused on finishing the school term strong and preparing for the wedding. She sewed her own dress with help from Margaret and Sarah, a simple gown of cream-colored wool, practical but pretty. She did not have much in the way of a trousseau, but she did not care. She was marrying the man she loved, and that was all that mattered. The wedding took place on a cold December morning in the little church. Most of the town turned out, filling the pews to capacity. Zelda walked down the aisle alone. There was no one to give her away, but she did not feel alone. She felt surrounded by community, by people who had come to care for her. And at the front of the church, waiting for her, was Kade. He wore new clothes, dark pants, and a white shirt, his hair trimmed neatly and his beard groomed. He looked different, more civilized, but his eyes were the same, steady and full of love. Reverend Peters led them through the vows, and when Kade said, "I do," his voice rang out clear and strong. Zelda's own voice trembled only slightly when she repeated the words, promising to love and honor this man for the rest of her life. When the Reverend pronounced them husband and wife, Kade kissed her gently, mindful of the watching crowd, but Zelda could feel the emotion in it, the commitment. The reception was held at the saloon, which George Mercer had closed for the occasion. There was food and music, and people danced and celebrated late into the afternoon. Zelda danced with her new husband, his large hand warm in hers, and felt a joy so complete it seemed impossible. As the sun began to set, they slipped away from the party. Kade lifted Zelda onto Ranger, then swung up behind her, and they rode to their new home together. The house was dark when they arrived, but Kade had laid a fire that morning, and it took only moments to get it blazing. In the flickering firelight, Kade took Zelda in his arms. "Mrs. Shepherd," he murmured. "I like the sound of that." "So do I," she said, smiling up at him. That night in the bed Kade had built with his own hands, they came together as husband and wife. Kade was gentle and patient, taking time to learn what pleased her, and Zelda gave herself to him completely, without reservation. It was not the awkward, uncomfortable experience she had heard whispered about. It was beautiful and intimate and right. Afterward, lying in Kade's arms, Zelda felt a completeness she had never known. This was what she had been missing all her life, not just physical intimacy, but this deep connection, this sense of belonging utterly to another person and having them belong to you. "I love you," she whispered into the darkness. "I love you too," Kade replied, his arms tightening around her. "Forever, Zelda, I will love you forever." The first months of marriage were an adjustment. Zelda continued teaching, rising early to walk to the schoolhouse and returning home in the afternoon, to find Kade working on some project, building a proper barn for the horses, clearing land for a garden, always improving their little homestead. They fell into a rhythm, learning each other's habits and preferences. Kade liked his coffee strong and black. Zelda read before bed, and he learned to enjoy listening to her voice as she shared passages from whatever book currently held her attention. He taught her more advanced writing skills, and she taught him to appreciate poetry, reading Wordsworth and Whitman aloud on quiet evenings. Winter settled over Nevada, bringing cold winds and occasional snow. The schoolhouse was drafty, and Zelda often came home with frozen feet and hands. Kade took to meeting her after school, bringing Rosie so she could ride home instead of walk, and warming her cold hands between his own large, warm palms. They were happy. Deeply, contentedly happy in a way that felt almost magical after the loneliness both had known. In February, Zelda began to suspect she might be pregnant. She waited another month to be sure, then went to see Doc Henderson, who confirmed her suspicions. She was going to have a baby, likely in late September. She told Kade that evening, nervous about his reaction. They had not specifically discussed children, though she had assumed they both wanted a family eventually. But Kade's face, when she told him the news, lit up with pure joy. He swept her into his arms, lifting her off her feet despite her laughing protests, and spun her around. "A baby," he kept saying, wonder in his voice. "We are going to have a baby." "You are happy?" she asked, though his reaction made the question unnecessary. "Happy does not begin to cover it," Kade said, setting her down gently. He placed his large hand over her still flat stomach. "You have given me everything, Zelda. A home, a purpose, love, and now this. I feel like the luckiest man alive." Tears filled Zelda's eyes. She had been crying at everything lately, and she pulled him down for a kiss. "I love you," she said. "I love you so much it scares me sometimes." "Do not be scared," he said softly. "I am going to take care of you and this baby, I promise you that." And he did. As Zelda's pregnancy progressed and she began to show, Kade became even more protective. He insisted she ride Rosie to school rather than walk, worried about her overdoing it. He took over more of the household chores, refusing to let her lift anything heavy. He built a beautiful cradle from wood he had carefully selected and aged, sanding it smooth as silk so no splinter could harm their child. The town rallied around them. Margaret organized a quilting bee, and the women made blankets and clothes for the baby. Sarah threw a party in Zelda's honor, filling her home with small gifts, knitted booties, tiny gowns, a silver rattle that had belonged to Sarah's own mother. Zelda taught through the spring term, finally stopping in June when the heat and her growing belly made it too difficult. The school board understood, arranging for a temporary teacher to fill in for the fall term, with the understanding that Zelda would return when she was able. The summer was long and hot, but Zelda did not mind. She spent her days reading and sewing and helping Kade with lighter chores. Her students came to visit, bringing wildflowers and drawings, excited about the baby. Kade had never been happier. He doted on Zelda, constantly asking how she felt, if she needed anything. At night, he would place his hand on her belly and talk to the baby, telling stories about the mountains and the town, about the life they would build together. "You are going to love your mother," he would say to her swollen abdomen. "She is the strongest, smartest woman in the world, and she is going to teach you everything she knows." Zelda would laugh and run her fingers through his hair. "And your father," she would add, "is the kindest, most devoted man. You are very lucky." In late September, on a warm evening just as the heat was finally breaking, Zelda's labor began. Kade rowed hard to fetch Doc Henderson and Margaret Hayes, then paced the main room while the women worked. It was a long night, and more than once Kade tried to go to his wife, unable to bear the sounds of her pain. But Margaret firmly turned him away each time. "She is doing fine," she assured him. "First babies take time, be patient." Finally, as dawn broke over the desert, a baby's cry split the air. Kade froze, his heart in his throat, until Margaret emerged with a tired smile. "You have a son," she said. "A big, healthy boy, and Zelda is tired but well." Kade did not wait for further permission. He went straight to the bedroom where Zelda lay propped against pillows, looking exhausted but radiant. And in her arms, wrapped in one of the quilts the town women had made, was the tiniest person Kade had ever seen. "Meet your son," Zelda said softly. Kade approached slowly, awed by the moment. The baby was red-faced and wrinkled, with a shock of dark hair and tiny, perfect hands. When Kade reached out hesitantly, the baby's fingers wrapped around his much larger one, gripping with surprising strength. "He is beautiful," Kade said, his voice rough with emotion. "You are beautiful." "I cannot believe you did this." "We did it," Zelda corrected gently. "He is ours, Kade, our son." They named him William after Kade's father, with the middle name of Samuel after Zelda's father, Will for short, and from the moment he came into the world, Will was loved beyond measure. The next few months were a blur of sleepless nights and overwhelming love. Kade was a natural father, surprisingly gentle with the tiny baby despite his own size. He would hold Will for hours, rocking him to sleep, singing old songs in his deep, rumbling voice. Zelda marveled at the transformation in her husband. The solitary mountain man had become a devoted family man, his world revolving around his wife and son. When Will was 3 months old, Zelda felt ready to return to teaching. They arranged for Margaret to watch the baby during school hours. Her own children were grown, and she was delighted to help. It was hard leaving Will each morning, but Zelda knew she needed the intellectual stimulation of teaching, and Kade supported her completely. "You are not just a mother," he reminded her when she expressed guilt about leaving the baby. "You are a teacher, and a damn good one. Those kids need you, and Will be fine. He has got Margaret loving on him, and I will check in every day at lunch." So they found their balance, Zelda teaching, Kade working various jobs around town and helping with Will in the evenings and on weekends. It was not always easy, but they made it work through communication and compromise and deep, abiding love. Will grew from a baby into a toddler, then a small boy. He had his mother's gray eyes and his father's dark hair, and he was curious and adventurous, constantly getting into everything. Kade taught him to ride almost before he could walk, sitting him in front of the saddle and holding him securely as they rode around the property. When Will was 3, Zelda became pregnant again. This time, the pregnancy was easier, and in the spring of 1877 they welcomed a daughter they named Rose Margaret, after the wildflowers that bloomed in the desert and the woman who had been such a good friend to Zelda. Rose was a sunny baby, quick to smile and laugh. She adored her big brother, and Will was surprisingly gentle with her, protective already at such a young age. The years passed in a blur of happiness. Zelda continued teaching, watching her students grow and learn, sending many of them off to further education with pride. Kade became an essential member of the Mojave community, respected for his skills and his steady, honest character. They added another room to the house when a third child, a boy they named Thomas after Thomas Hayes, arrived in 1879. Their home was full and noisy and wonderful. Everything Zelda had never known she wanted. Sarah Mercer married David Palmer and had children of her own. Margaret and Thomas Hayes celebrated their silver wedding anniversary. The town of Mojave grew slowly but steadily, adding new families, new businesses, new life. Through it all, Kade and Zelda's love remained constant. They still rode together when they could steal time away from the children and responsibilities, Kade teaching Zelda new trails and secret places in the mountains he had once called home. She never grew tired of riding, of the freedom and exhilaration it brought her. And sometimes, on quiet evenings when the children were asleep, they would sit on their porch and remember that first day, the overturned stagecoach, the frightened city woman, the mountain man who had stopped to help. They would laugh about Zelda's first awkward attempts at riding, about how Kade had held the reins with her, guiding her patiently. "I knew that day," Kade would say. "When I held you on Ranger and taught you to feel the rhythm, I knew you were going to change my life." "I was terrified," Zelda would admit, "but I trusted you. Even then I trusted you. And I will never betray that trust," Kade would promise, pulling her close. "Not ever." As the years turned into decades, they watched their children grow. Will became a teacher like his mother, opening a school in a nearby town. Rose married a rancher and had 5 children of her own. Thomas went east for university, then returned to practice law in Nevada. Kade's hair turned gray, and Zelda's eyes developed laugh lines from years of smiling. But the love between them never dimmed. They still held hands when they walked. He still helped her onto her horse, even though she had been riding for 30 years. She still rode to him in the evenings, and he still listened with the same attentive devotion he had shown from the beginning. When Zelda finally retired from teaching at the age of 55, the town threw a celebration in her honor. 3 generations of students came to pay tribute to the woman who had shaped their education and their lives. There were tears and laughter and stories, so many stories. Kade stood beside her through it all, his hand on her back, supporting her as he always had. When they finally returned home that night, he took her in his arms and kissed her with all the passion of their youth. "I am so proud of you," he said. "You have made such a difference in this town and so many lives." "We have made a difference," Zelda corrected. "Everything I have done, I could do because you were beside me. You believed in me, supported me, loved me. This life we have built, it is ours together, Kade, all of it." They stood on their porch, looking out over the land they had made their own. The mountains rose in the distance, purple in the twilight. The desert stretched out, vast and beautiful and unforgiving. But they had made a home here against all odds, a city woman who had never ridden a horse before. A mountain man who had spent years alone. They had found each other in the wilderness, and together they had built something lasting. Their grandchildren came to visit often, and Kade taught them to ride just as he had taught their mothers and fathers. Zelda rode to them, sharing her love of books and learning. The little house that had started as a simple 2-room cabin had grown over the years, with additions and improvements, but it still felt like home. On their 30th wedding anniversary, their children and grandchildren gathered for a celebration. The house and yard were full of people, of love, of life. Kade stood with Zelda in the center of it all, and he thought about the journey that had brought them here. He had never imagined That day he had come across the overturned stagecoach, that his life was about to change so completely. He had stopped to help because it was the right thing to do, not expecting anything in return. But he had gained everything: love, family, purpose, belonging. "What are you thinking?" Zelda asked softly, reading his expression as she always could. "I am thinking about how lucky I am," Kade said. "How one moment, one choice to stop and help a stranger led to all of this. To you, to our children, to this life. I am thinking about how empty my world was before you came into it." Zelda leaned against him, fitting perfectly against his side as she always had. "I am thinking the same thing. I came to Mojave looking for a fresh start, for independence. I found all of that, but I found so much more. I found you. I found home." They stood together, surrounded by the family they had built, the community they had become part of, the life they had created from nothing. And as the sun set over the Nevada desert, painting the sky in shades of gold and orange and purple, Kade bent to kiss his wife, his partner, his love. She had never ridden a horse before that first day. He had taught her slowly, holding the reins with her, guiding her with patience and care. And in doing so, he had found the person who would transform his solitary existence into a life of love and meaning. They had both been searching, though neither had known it. Both lost in their own ways, trying to find where they belonged in an uncertain world. But they had found each other, and in finding each other, they had found themselves. The years ahead would bring challenges, as all lives do. There would be loss and hardship mixed with the joy. But they would face it together, their bond unshakable, their love unwavering. From that first ride, when Zelda had trusted Kade to teach her and he had gently guided her, they had been partners. They would remain partners until the end of their days. As the party continued around them, children laughing and running through the yard, grandchildren playing in the twilight, Kade whispered in Zelda's ear, "I would do it all again, you know. Every moment, every challenge, it was all worth it to end up here with you." "So would I," Zelda said, turning to look up at the man who had been her teacher, her rescuer, her husband, her partner through 3 decades of life. "So would I, my love, always and forever." And under the vast Nevada sky, in the home they had built together, surrounded by the family they had created, Kade and Zelda Shepherd stood wrapped in each other's arms. Their story complete, a story of courage and trust, of learning and growing, of 2 lost souls who had found each other in the wilderness and built a life that was richer and fuller than either had ever imagined possible. The little city woman who had boarded a stagecoach looking for a fresh start. The mountain man who had stopped to help a stranger in need. They had become each other's destiny, their lives forever intertwined from that moment when he had lifted her onto his horse and held the reins with her, teaching her not just to ride, but to trust, to love, to believe in the possibility of happiness even in the most unlikely circumstances. Their love story would be told in Mojave for generations, the tale of the schoolteacher and the mountain man, who had proven that love could bloom anywhere, even in the harsh desert, as long as 2 hearts were willing to be brave enough to reach for it. And so they lived in love and contentment, blessed beyond measure, their days full of purpose and joy. When they finally passed, many years later, it was within days of each other, as if neither could bear to exist without the other. They were laid to rest side by side in the Mojave cemetery, their headstones simple but perfect, Kade and Zelda Shepherd, together always. But their legacy lived on in their children and grandchildren, in the students Zelda had taught, in the community they had helped build, in the very fabric of Mojave itself. They had left the world better than they had found it, had loved deeply and truly, had built something lasting from the simple foundation of trust and patience, and a mountain man teaching a city woman to ride, holding the reins with her until she could hold them on her own. And perhaps, on quiet desert evenings when the wind whispers through the sagebrush and the last light lingers on the mountains, you can still feel their presence, the ghost of a man and woman riding together across the land they loved. Forever young, forever in love, forever home.